Hi there, everyone. It's 4 o'clock in New York as we begin MSNBC's special coverage of election night in America. It's here. Might be the most anticipated election night in recent memory. The first poll set to close about 2 hours from right now, with all eyes on the critical battleground states that could make the difference between a decisive outcome and a protracted legal battle to determine a winner. Of course, either way, it is very possible that we might not know tonight or even by tomorrow morning who has won this year's election, with so many Americans voting by mail as the coronavirus pandemic continues to loom over all aspects of American life. Election officials across the country urging patience, cautioning voters against jumping to conclusions before enough ballots are counted, and reminding people that it is normal to vote for vote counting to continue for days after an election. In fact, it happens every year. What we do know already, a staggering and historic tally of early votes, more than 100 million ballots cast nationwide. It has showcased just how extraordinary the election is already shaping up to be as voters continue to cast their ballots into the remaining hours of this presidential contest. Of course, much of the tension on this final day of campaigning is centered on Pennsylvania, where Joe Biden was out with voters throughout much of the day in his childhood hometown of Scranton this morning, then on to Philadelphia before making his way to the city where his campaign is headquartered in Wilmington, Delaware, just in the last hour. Both campaigns have acknowledged in recent days the importance of the Keystone State. The clearest path to 270 electoral votes for Joe Biden runs through it, and Donald Trump basically can't win without it. Already, the Trump campaign is beginning to signal some concern over voter turnout today in Pennsylvania. A person with direct knowledge of Trump campaign operations telling NBC News, quote, "The team in Pennsylvania was not as prepared as it should be in a state that could decide the presidency." President Trump maintaining a lower key schedule today than his opponent. He called into Fox and Friends this morning, had some complaints for them, and made a brief visit to his campaign headquarters in Virginia before hunkering down inside the White House as the drama of tonight's historic vote tally is set to get underway. Let's go out to two of the most closely watched states tonight, the aforementioned Pennsylvania. My colleague and friend Ali Velshi is in Philadelphia, where Joe Biden just wrapped up a visit there. And in Miami Lakes, Florida, our friend Alicia Menendez joins us. Ali, let's start with you. What's the feeling there?
Very enthusiastic, very positive. We don't have lines right now. I'm at the Overbrook branch in Philadelphia, the library. Overbrook, for those of you who know Philadelphia, is just a little west and north of West Philadelphia. It's predominantly an African-American area, but I'm literally blocks from where the city of Philadelphia ends, and it becomes those famous mainline suburbs that we talk about so often. And those suburbs, by the way, have been swinging more Democratic. They used to be sort of red areas. They're now blue areas. So the issue here, as you know, Nicole, is not whether Joe Biden's going to win Philadelphia and the collar counties around it. It's by how much. Because as Donald Trump has made this appeal to Pennsylvania, particularly as it relates to Joe Biden's position on fracking in more rural Pennsylvania and western counties of the state, the turnout in Allegheny County, which is Pittsburgh, and Philadelphia County are going to matter. I just had somebody tell me, a local city councilor tell me, that they are looking at turnout numbers here that are mimicking Barack Obama's turnout numbers, not Hillary Clinton's turnout numbers. So in the end, there are counties in which a Republican presidential candidate doesn't get a lot of votes at all in some of these Philadelphia, County of Philadelphia, City of Philadelphia counties. But they are looking at levels of voting that are very enthusiastic. The other thing is, you just mentioned Donald Trump's call into Fox. He's tweeted and he said to Fox that because of the Supreme Court decision to allow ballots to be postmarked until today that will be counted on Friday, he thinks that's going to be a problem. It's going to delay the results out of Pennsylvania, and it's going to cause unrest. Now, as you know, there's been some unrest in Philadelphia in the last week or so because a man was shot last Monday by police in West Philadelphia. There was some unrest because of that. The National Guard was in town because of that. They have made very clear, the governor's made very clear, as has the mayor, the National Guard's not here for election stuff. I spoke to 2 voters here about an hour ago who said, I don't know what this talk about violence is, that they're not expecting any of that in Philadelphia. They are expecting, however, that we may not have complete results in Philadelphia or in Pennsylvania tonight. So if it does come down to it, you know this better than anyone because you've been talking about it a lot. If it does come down to the 20 votes that the state of Pennsylvania has up for grabs, we may be waiting a while. Nicole?
Alicia, thank you, Ali Velshi. Alicia, let me bring you into this. I mean, just pick up on Ali's threads about turnout, about the feel on the ground, and pick up on this Trump interview this morning. You know, one thing about Donald Trump is he doesn't really hide a lot in terms of strategy, in terms of his feelings, in terms of his mood. And this Fox and Friends interview belied what I'm hearing about Florida, which is that Donald Trump is in a strong position in a state like Florida, much stronger even than in, well, certainly than he is in Pennsylvania by the admission of his own advisors. Do people pick up on that? Are they watching the tone that Trump has struck today and some sort of downtrodden mood that he was projecting there on national cable?
Well, everything here has been a big party, Nicole, which is interesting because there haven't actually been that many voters coming in and out. One poll watcher told me 3:30 normally here during early vote. This parking lot was absolutely packed. You could not find a spot. Today, I just haven't seen many voters going in and out. This is a precinct that broke for Trump 4 years ago. All of the voters I have spoken with, all Trump supporters, some of them who decided late, some of them who've always known that they wanted to vote and they were going to come out today. I think a lot of this goes back to the fact that you already have 9 million Floridians who have voted either because they voted early in person or because they voted early by mail. So there is both an advantage to Democrats built in there. They had about 100,000 more of their voters showing up for that early vote or those mail-in voting. The challenge for Democrats, or the advantage for Republicans, is they have about another 150,000 high-propensity voters who, as of yesterday, had yet to vote. So they were hoping, Republicans were hoping to turn them out. What Democrats were hoping was that they had enough NPA voters, voters with no party affiliation, who for them could make up the difference. The other thing I'm hearing from Democrats, a little bit of concern over this county, Miami-Dade, which is a Democratic county, will be a Democratic county tonight, but it becomes a question of margins. Some concern that Republicans have built their margins here in part because of inroads that Trump has made within the Hispanic community. So that's something that we'll also be watching tonight. But the one thing I keep hearing from everyone is this is going to come out to turnout. And so we're going to be watching that turnout, seeing whether or not people turn out. And part of the reason that's important is because it seems as though Democrats and Republicans, Nicole, are using 2 very different models. Democrats seem to be using the 2012 model when you had Barack Obama getting about 60% support among the Latino electorate, still carrying the state. And then you would have, in that case, if Joe Biden hits that 60% number, making up the difference among some of those NPAs we've seen him polling well with, among white voters and among seniors. If he can do that, Democrats believe he can carry the state. Republicans seem to be using, Nicole, a 2016 model. Those are the numbers that they want to see replicated again tonight. And I think that is the big question, and part of why the analysis you hear from the 2 parties is pretty different.
Alicia, you mentioned not a lot of people coming in and out to vote. Is that reporting that you can apply to any other precinct, or is that specific to your location?
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking to our other NBC reporters who are on the ground. Other precincts in this area in South Florida do seem to be slow. I asked one organizer about it earlier today. They said they weren't entirely clear on what it was, that there was some concern that the sort of fear and exhaustion that has been baked into this election, particularly here in South Florida, could be demotivating voters. At the same time, she said, listen, I'm hopeful that people are going to get out of work at 5:30, and then you're going to see them rushing to the polls, but we won't know until we get there. Nicole?
Ali Velshi, Alicia Menendez, thank you both so much. There's nothing like that ground truth. Thank you so much for starting us off with that. Let's turn now to some of our favorite reporters and friends, NBC and MSNBC national affairs analyst, my friend John Heilman. He's in St. Pete, Florida. He's the co-host and executive producer of Showtime's The Circus, as well as the executive editor of The Recount, as well as the host of a podcast that he got me to say some words. I had to drop some dollars into the swear jar this morning over. Also joining us, Washington Post columnist and MSNBC political analyst Eugene Robinson's here, and our dear friend A.B. Stoddard, associate editor and columnist for Real Clear Politics. I will start with you, John Heilman. This is as weird of a year, as bizarre of a context for people to have to decide who to put in charge of our troubled country for the next 4 years, troubled in terms of the pandemic and the economic challenges that have ensued. I know you're sort of barnstorming in a non-traditional way. What is the feeling that you get out there?
Well, first of all, hi, Nicole.
Hi.
Happy Election Day. And I think, I think I will say, not to be overly self-promotional about the podcast about Hell and High Water, but there's been an outpouring of love for you over this podcast. It's only been out for a few hours, but thousands of people saying how much they love hearing you talk. Not when you're on television, just in a more casual environment, and also amazement that you curse more than I do, which I don't think anybody thought was possible. But the F-bombs are flying throughout this podcast. So anybody who wants to hear Nicole Wallace swear like a sailor.
They're rethinking the lineup tonight. Do they really need me?
Yeah, dial it in. That's what I'd say. Just dial it in. I have been all over the place, Nicole, the last 72. Well, now headed into more like 84 hours or so. We spent the weekend in Texas, Iowa, Minnesota, Montana, Ohio, Georgia, and now, as you said, I'm down in Florida in Pinellas County, which is like the swingiest swing county in the state. And I'm going to hang out here and watch some Pinellas data geeks in the Pinellas County Democratic Party count the votes here tonight and maybe give us an early window into who's going to win Florida. I think there is an extraordinary amount of something that you and I have talked a lot about. I mean, there's an enormous amount of fear and an enormous amount of trepidation and an enormous amount of anxiety all over the country. You go north, south, east, west. The notion that this resurgence of COVID, not that it ever desurged fully, but right now it's on fire in a lot of places around the country, and you see it in every corner, in every nook, and every cranny, and every crevice. It's front and center, and it's in the background all at once. But there's also this other thing, which is and it's been sort of stunning to see it, is that we told America that this virus was serious. We told America, and I mean, America knew this already, but we in the media who cover this stuff, we kept telling them the virus is really serious and this election really matters. And so you got to plan your vote. You got to do stuff to get ready for this. If you want your vote to count, take steps, take measures, make a plan. A lot of people, the political class and the communications class that covers it, really projected this message for months and months, and people listened. I mean, listened in a way that I think is just stunning to see. And I said, I've been north, south, east, west, been all over the country in the last 4 days. And man, people they get that this election matters a lot. They get that they are on the ballot, that the country is on the ballot as much as Donald Trump and Joe Biden are on the ballot. This is a fundamental existential choice, and they really took extraordinary proactive measures to make sure that they were going to have a say in how this was worked out. And I have found that element of it, for all of the fear and trembling out there in the country, and there's a lot of it, to see people that committed and that focused on and that comprehending of the stakes here, and then taking actions to make sure that they got to have a say in their future. I have found it kind of incredibly inspiring over these last few days.
It's inspiring, AB, and it also, I mean, you get to these final hours when you're still having theoretical conversations. And just to pull back the curtain a little bit, we get the most unreliable wave of early data in about an hour. They're called exit polls, and they come in and in 04, the first three waves were wrong. So we're very judicious as a network not to report data until it's more solid. But I want to ask you just about Heilman's point. I mean, people were told to plan their vote, everyone. it was not a partisan message. This network sponsored a campaign, Plan Your Vote. Donald Trump didn't want people to vote by mail. Donald Trump disparaged the mail-in vote. Donald Trump, in the words of Ben Ginsburg, Republican election lawyer, encouraged his supporters to commit felony vote fraud. So the only people that were hearing a different message from this nonpartisan, COVID-inspired Plan Your Vote were the Trump voters. And it might be one instance where that information ecosystem bites Trump in the butt. I mean, he was told that he was telling his voters not to trust the mail. He was slowing down the mail itself, telling his voters not to trust absentee vote. He was attacking the early vote for months. And it seems like one of the things we'll learn tonight is, one, whether or not they believed him, they usually do, and two, whether or not that helped or hurt him.
Well, first of all, Nicole, thank you so much for having me on this day. It's been quite a journey. And I'm going to echo John Halman's Election Day praise for you. You've been a very valuable voice to millions of people in just a wretched, dark time. But on a positive note, I am completely amazed that we have reached this point in the day and we have had a really peaceful, organized process brought to us by not only the determination of the people that you just talked about, the voters, but these election officials across the country in thousands of places, in thousands of separate systems, in both parties or non-party affiliated, who are devoted to a legitimate process. And they've worked so hard in a pandemic. We've had new volunteers come in and replace volunteers who were over the age of 65 and just couldn't put themselves in harm's way and risk contracting the virus. This has just been an epic event in people coming together and working so hard to protect this system, which is a foundation of our democracy and makes this country so wonderful. So I'm just stunned at how many people whose names we'll never know. Yeah. We're going to do a great thing, and Donald Trump never realized that. You had to get past them. Now, that said, there will be a lot. We're hearing bad news about the post office again. There will be a lot of frustration about disqualified ballots. There were 550,000 disqualified absentee ballots in the primaries earlier in the year. It's really hard to fill them out in some places properly. So that could cut into Joe Biden's lead. And I also want to just point out that everything the president has said, and we've been talking about it for weeks and months, but especially in the last few days, I mean, if in advance announcing that you as President of the United States will disqualify and discount and delegitimize legally cast ballots in the United States of America, if that isn't a high crime, I really don't know what is. And the silence of Republicans has been absolutely shameful, and I really hope that we're going to be hearing from them in the days to come if Donald Trump continues to provoke his supporters, lie about what happened, and create an alternative narrative about the results and his lawsuits and everything else. So a lot of people to thank today, and I'm really, really grateful for how far we've gotten to the 4 o'clock hour.
I want to say that is one conversation that, regardless of the results tonight, that needs to be picked up, as you said, by Democrats and Republicans. And you see Ben Ginsburg and Michael Steele, they're non-elected officials, but they are the most prominent Republican voices. And I would hope that if anyone wants to be a party that still stands for voting and democracy, that they would participate in those efforts in an autopsy-like effort. I want to play each side's. Here's Joe Biden. Let's listen in to what he says. He's in Wilmington, Delaware. Let's listen in.
Well, I think it's because two reasons. One, all that I've done, from violence against women and my activities relating to access for women opportunities, to Donald Trump.
Mr. Vice President, this has clearly been an unprecedented campaign given the pandemic. Just looking back, the reflection moments, are there any lessons learned, any regrets, anything you would change?
No, there's not. I mean, as you guys know, have had to cover me for a long time. I haven't changed what I've been saying since the day I announced. And the day I announced, everybody thought that I was way off pace. And by the way, I don't mean that as I'm not being critical of anybody else. I'm just saying that I believe very, very strongly, I really mean it, that we have to restore decency and honor in our system, or it's going to fall apart. Secondly, I believe extremely strongly, and I know you've all watched it from the very beginning, that we have to rebuild the middle class. We have to give ordinary people a fighting chance. They can do anything when you give them a chance. And thirdly, we have to unite the country. Well, all three of those things were viewed as either too much of a reach or not a reach enough. And I haven't changed my view. And so, you know, this is, for example, I didn't realize this was here. The Reverend Herring, who was one of the 5 major leaders in the black community when I got started in Wilmington, back when I was a kid, when I started off as a lifeguard. My good luck charm is always go back to where I started. Every election I go by. So we're going to go back by Price's Run swimming pool. And it was, you know, the leadership of the community from here, from Riverside all the way up to Price's Run on the east side was overwhelmingly African American, but it all was in the black church. The black church was the heart and soul of the entire movement for people here. And so it's, and when I started off as a kid getting involved, I had a job at a nice country club kind of pool as a lifeguard. I wanted to work on the east side because I knew I played ball with a lot of great black athletes, but I knew, you know, I didn't know them. I mean, we knew each other. We were friends, but I didn't know them. And it was a great education. It was like the Green Mile, you know, you see the movie? Well, it's like that. You know, you begin to, when you realize that the people I've known for a long time that, you know, they lived in the middle of a city and a county that was white, and they didn't know anybody. I mean, they knew, but they didn't know anybody. And it was a real education for me. I'm not being melodramatic. I mean, it really was. And I think I've told a couple of you, the guys who, and there were men who were all the lifeguards at that time, the guys who got the jobs were usually the relatively well-known athletes who they hired. And, you know, there were people, all the 13 lifeguards I worked with, all of them became really successful in their lives. And, but it was interesting that we'd sit and talk, and they'd ask me questions that stunned me. They would ask, like, I think I've told you before, you know, Jamie asked me, do you have a jerry can, meaning a 5-gallon can for gasoline? I said, no, what do you need a jerry can for? I'm going to go see my grandmother. I said, what's she needed for her? Oil burn or something? He said, no, she lives in North Carolina. I can't stop at any gas stations. We can't stop. Got to have my, I mean, things like that were sort of eye-opening for me.
Do you think things are better now or worse?
Well, I think they're better now. I know they're better now. And you see things happening here that are changing the way in which people interact. There's a lot more. I got involved running for the county council because I thought it was unfair that there was redlining in the county. People weren't able to move. That's changed a lot. And so the whole range of things have changed. But there's still a great need. But what's happening is that there's people who are in a position that they're getting engaged now. And it's mainly, like I said, you know, when you had guys like Reverend Herring, I'd go to Mass and then go down and sit in his church, and we'd talk about, plan about what we're going to do. We're going to desegregate a movie theater. We're going to march for something. I mean, and by the way, I'm not making myself out to be something special. It was just a lot of folks my age got engaged, and that's how I got engaged.
What do you know about America, or what do you think about America that you didn't know in 1972 or 1988 or 2008? I mean, just looking back over the course of your career and the moment you're at right now.
Well, I mean, there's a whole lot. Hopefully, you know, with age comes a little bit of wisdom. What I know is that hadn't changed is my absolute belief in the American people. You give them an even shot, they can do anything. I mean, they really can.
What do you think if President Trump claims victory tonight and it's not clear that he won? What's your plan for that? Via tweet or otherwise? Because we know, based on our reporting at Axios, that that's what he plans to do.
Well, look, like I said, you've heard me use the line today several times. presidents can't determine what votes counted and not counted. And, voters determine who's president. This isn't going to, no matter what he does, no matter what he says, the votes are going to be counted.
Do you feel a responsibility to respond, though, or say something?
No, I don't. I mean, look, it depends on what he says and how he says it. But, I don't feel a responsibility to respond. And by the way, as you've seen some of the articles written, I mean, this talk about there being disruptions and things like that, I mean, he's embarrassing Republicans. Republicans are walking away from him. I mean, but look, like I said, I'm superstitious about predicting what an outcome is going to be until it happens. That's sort of who I am, how I've always run. And, but I'm hopeful. That's all right.
Thanks, guys. We got to go. Thank you. Early returns. What are you hearing today?
Well, what I'm hearing is that there's overwhelming turnout. And overwhelming turnout, particularly of young people, of women, and there's an overwhelming turnout among African Americans, for example, in Georgia and Florida over the age of 65. So, I mean, the things that are happening bode well for the base that has been supporting it. But we'll see. We'll see.
What do you have to say? You have to go, Mariana. I feel positive that you are on the path to winning.
Well, I don't know. We don't know how this is going to come in. For example, if Florida came in by 1, it's over. Done. If Florida doesn't come in and, what happens is the early votes occur in some other states, I think we're going to do well we're going to reestablish that blue wall. I feel good about that. We'll see but it's just so uncertain. Look, you can't think of an election in the recent past where so many states are up for grabs. The idea, I'm in play in Texas, Georgia, North Carolina, Florida. I mean, come on. I mean, Texas? I don't.
Does Ohio still win, given the tradition of presidential nominees going on to win the presidency because of their win in Ohio?
Well, but, there's also been other traditions. They haven't been able to win unless they won Pennsylvania. There's all kinds of traditions. The only thing you know is traditions are made to be broken. There's just so much in play right now, and there's such overwhelming vote out there. We'll see. And if there's something to talk about tonight, I'll talk about it. If not, I'll wait till the votes are counted the next day.
Great,
okay?
Thank you so much.
Candidates at the end, Eugene, tend to be really tired and very reflective. Joe Biden began those remarks by talking about what sounded like maybe his early racial awakening, talking about being a lifeguard, talking about friends who couldn't stop for gas on a drive to North Carolina. But then I think answering questions on a lot of people's minds, how does he see tonight shaping up? And Eugene, he said, if he wins Florida, it's over. If he doesn't, the night may be a longer one. And Joe Biden saying, I think the news there was that if there's something to say tonight, he'll come out and say it. But otherwise, he's going to wait until all the votes have been counted. Eugene.
Well, that makes sense. I mean, it just makes sense. Look, 100 million people have already voted, right? Which is most of the people who will vote, surely. And those votes, some places will be counted. They started counting them. Other places, they just started today, maybe counting them, and they won't get them counted for another several days. So, this is the point, and it's only 4 o'clock, right? So there's a lot more voting yet to happen, even here on the East Coast. So this is the point where during a normal election cycle, nobody really knows anything. You might have a sense of how many registered Republicans and how many registered Democrats are showing up here or there, but you have no sense of which way independents, who are the largest voting bloc, are breaking, which is really actually more important, and you have no sense of that at all. So this time, we know even less than we would normally know about where things stand, and so I think it's perfectly appropriate for Vice President Biden to say, if there's something to say, I'll say it. He's absolutely right that if Florida counts quickly and if it's clear that he is winning or is going to win Florida, then it is pretty much over. It's very difficult to see how President Trump can win if Joe Biden takes Florida. But we don't know that we will get a result that definitive. Florida's usually close, and close elections take some time to resolve. And there's no guarantee that Florida's going to have a winner of the state tonight. So we're just all going to have to settle in and see what the voters said. Most of them have already said their piece, and so but it is heartening and wonderful that this has been just a pageant of democracy kind of day, without unrest, without problems at the polls, without terribly long lines most places. People did make a plan to vote. They executed that plan, and we'll just have to wait.
John, Eugene is so right. Nobody knows anything, but we both have I think our reporting from both campaigns about how they see these states in this final day. And I find it interesting that folks on both sides think Florida looks pretty good for Donald Trump, and no one on the Biden side would say that they need Florida. That's not really being viewed as a bellwether the way, I just don't want to send out a signal so that people are watching Florida and think so goes Florida, so goes the country. The way folks have really mapped out the travel, and the travel reflects this in the final days, is Democrats are trying to reestablish the blue wall, which is Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. Democrats and Republicans will tell you that Joe Biden is ahead in all three of the blue wall states. And most folks I have talked to are looking to North Carolina and Georgia to see if those flip Biden. What are you hearing from your reporting that folks are looking at in terms of the map?
Well, first of all, I'd say, I'll go through in the order that you went through, Nicole. I think there's definitely the case that Florida is not a must-win for Joe Biden. There's no doubt about that, because the easiest way for Joe Biden to get to 270 electoral votes is to win those three states in the Great Lakes, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, that Donald Trump won by less than 1% in each case in 2016. Joe Biden, traditionally Democratic states, Joe Biden brings them back into the Democratic column, and that's it. He's got 270 electoral votes. That's the easiest path. The complication there is that all three of those states have told us that they are not going to have a result tonight. And that's not a problem. That's not a defect. They are just dealing with a lot of early vote. That's going to take them some time to count those votes. Their systems are set up. Sometimes they don't have a result on election night, and so it's going to take some days. Donald Trump's going to make hay out of that, though. We've seen him already doing it. So that's the little bit of a complexity there, and it's why the Biden campaign, though it does not need Florida, has put a lot of effort and energy into Florida because of the fact that, as Eugene says, if they could get Florida, it would end the night early. And I think everyone on the Democratic side feels that, and even some Republicans you talk to, feel like it would be good for the country to not have a long, drawn-out process with litigation and Donald Trump chicanery if you could just know on election night who had won. And so there's been a lot of focus on Florida. And I'll just say this. It's true. It was true going into last weekend that most people thought Donald Trump had a narrow advantage here. Democrats had a very good weekend this weekend in terms of early vote. Barack Obama closed here last night. There was a reason why he closed here last night, because I think the Biden people did at the very end here think that there's it's about as close to a 50-50 thing as there could be. Yeah. But I don't think anyone in the Biden world would be surprised tonight if they end up actually winning Florida.
John Heilman, Eugene Robinson, A.B. Stoddard, three of my favorite people to talk to on TV and off. Thank you so much for starting us off. When we come back, election officials preparing for the worst, but early signs show that things at the polls are running pretty smoothly and without incident. But with Trump and his campaign already calling places like Philadelphia a disaster, will their open effort to disqualify ballots in these must-win places continue through the night? And Trump campaigning like it's 2016 all over again, struggling to make the case for another 4 years for himself. Today, he's got a pile of grievances. We'll talk about all that and more when MSNBC's special election coverage on Election Day in America continues. Don't go anywhere.
There's been some talk of it. They may very well try to, stop the count in a state like Pennsylvania. It is a complete fool's errand. Those votes will be counted. Let me tell you tonight, those votes will be counted. We'll see whether they try it. But if they try it, it will be one of the most clumsy, doomed to failure legal initiatives I've seen in my entire career.
Donald Trump can tweet, and he can pout, and he can make whatever statements he wants to make. But this election will not be over here in Pennsylvania. A winner will not be declared until we can deduce the will of the people. And that will happen after all of those ballots are counted.
Joe Biden's top legal advisor and even the Pennsylvania Attorney General saying they are prepared and confident that all votes will be counted and that any more desperate legal attempts put up by the Republicans to throw out ballots will fail. A desperate Trump, angered by the possibility of waiting to hear his own fate because of the unprecedented amount of mail-in ballots during a pandemic spiraled out of control under his leadership, has warned his lawyers are ready to go as soon as the election is over. As both campaigns brace for intensified battles for in-play states, the New York Times reports this, quote, in his last days of campaigning, Mr. Trump has essentially admitted that he does not expect to win without going to court. Trump in that moment said out loud what other Republicans have preferred to say quietly, which is that his best chance of holding on to power at this point may rest in a scorched earth campaign to disqualify as many votes as possible for his Democratic opponent. Let's bring into this conversation our friend Jeremy Bash, former chief of staff at the CIA and the Department of Defense and an MSNBC national security contributor, and Peter Baker, New York Times chief White House correspondent and MSNBC political analyst, whose byline is one of those on that reporting we just read from. Peter, let me start with the reporting. It's a remarkable piece on the front page of today's New York Times on Election Day in America, and it really is as sort of meta as you can get. Donald Trump, who doesn't expect to win based on the vote count, plans to go to court.
Well, he said at the rally the other day, he says, as soon as the polls are closed, I'm sending our lawyers in. That is somebody who does not sound confident, obviously, that he's going to win on the basis of the counts as they are currently going to be processed. And he's looking to change the rules in a way to prevent votes that presumably will favor his opponent from being counted. Now, he's already railing against the Supreme Court for allowing Pennsylvania to, in keeping with its own procedures, to count ballots that were mailed in by today but arrive after today for 3 days. He's got a lot of other, lawyers looking at other state rules around the country for possible challenges if those become available. Now, not all of this may be moot. It may be moot if the numbers are pretty decisive. But if there are states where the count is close, where these kinds of tactics might make a difference, you could expect to see lawyers challenge them as they have in Texas. Now, they may not succeed. Bob Bauer from the Biden campaign, who you just showed, may be right. But even if they don't succeed, there is a consequence to this. The consequence, of course, being to sow suspicion and muddy the waters for an election defeat, to give, first of all, voters a reason why he was defeated, which is to say that it was a rigged election, he was cheated, and also with the consequence of undercutting, I think, public faith in the democratic system that has been the bedrock of this country now for more than 2 centuries.
Jeremy, if I hold my breath until my brain's deprived of oxygen and try to see the world the way Donald Trump does, you can see his exasperation, right? So he stacked the Supreme Court. He's been telling his voters for months that the election, if he loses, is rigged. If he wins, it's hunky-dory. But if he loses, it's been rigged. And now he finds himself really seeing this race, it would appear, the same way the Biden campaign does, as being a near impossible or an extremely difficult path to 270 if you play fair and square. It strikes me, and I'm thinking of this interview I did with a golf writer who talked about how Donald Trump cheats at golf. It would seem that no matter what happens, if Donald Trump wins the way Donald Trump thinks the only way he can win, it would appear, by cheating through legal action, it will again be this constant echo of the Trump presidency that he needs to cheat to prevail.
Yeah, and the cheating is on so many levels. He claims he won golf tournaments he never even played in. But Nicole, if I recall correctly, you and I first met 20 years ago around the Florida recount. And obviously, since then, there's been such a hyper-focus on what happens when there are controversies around elections. But I want to make clear that, first of all, if you're listening right now or you're watching, or you're going to be heading out to the polls after work, stay in line. Your vote will count. At the end of the day, the state authorities will make sure that every vote that comes in will be processed and counted, notwithstanding whatever Donald Trump and his legal henchmen claim. By the way, it's not just that they're going to rush into the courthouse after voting closes. They're already there. A story just broke in the last hour out of Nevada, out of Clark County, where the Trump campaign has already sued to try to invalidate mail-in ballots. And we know that the Trump campaign has been trying to do the same thing in Pennsylvania. And by the way, they have lost every single lawsuit they have filed. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court, for example, has said very clearly, very unambiguously, and of course the U.S. Supreme Court has kept that rule in place, that any vote, any ballot that comes in over the next 3 days, if it's mailed by the end of today, if it's postmarked by today, will be counted.
Peter, you've covered a lot of presidents, and you covered this one. I wonder what you think of the tone he struck on Fox and Friends, attacking Brian Kilmeade and his co-anchors for not being the Fox of 4 years ago.
Yeah, look, anybody who in any way disappoints him, no matter how supportive of they have been, is, going to incur his wrath. And what's really striking, of course, to see it on Fox and Friends, because really there's been no single television show that has been more important to the rise of President Trump, at least politically, right? Maybe you could say The Apprentice, but the truth is, when he got started on his quest for the presidency, the place he did it was Fox and Friends. The place he was calling into week after week after week, really sort of put him in touch with conservative Fox voters, was the Fox and Friends show. So for him to sort of lash out a little bit, I think, indicates some frustration. I was also struck by his comments at his headquarters today, where he kind of ruminated on whether or not he might lose. He says, winning is easy, losing is hard, especially for me. That suggests to me somebody who is aware that he may not, in fact, come out again the way he did 4 years ago when he won that sort of inside straight of an election by capturing the Electoral College, but not the popular vote.
Jeremy, let me give you the last word on just what the rhetoric out of the president looks like from foreign capitals. I mean, to see a president talking, and the New York Times reporting on the front page of their newspaper that the president recognizes that he doesn't necessarily have a political path to victory, but is pursuing a legal one. How does that look?
Well, Nicole, in our entire history, we've had peaceful transfers of power, and a presidential election is the crown jewel of our democracy. When we go around the world and we talk to foreign leaders, countries, both friends and foes, we oftentimes talk about our presidential elections, our peaceful transfers of power. And for a president of the United States, the symbol of America, for better or for worse, to sort of denigrate the values, the norms, the idea that we could have a lawful election, a peaceful transfer of power, I think just shows you how much American power has been undermined by what President Trump has done. And we're going to find it's going to be very difficult to achieve our objectives on a global stage if President Trump is reelected, or if he has his way about how the next day or the next several weeks go.
Jeremy Bash, Peter Baker, I know one thing for sure, no matter what happens tonight, we will be calling on both of you to talk us through it early and often. Thank you both for making time for us today. Up next for us, we'll get a sense of the fork in the road. These candidates are out with just a few hours until polls close on this Election Day 2020. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Mr. President, have you been an acceptance speech and a concession speech?
No, I'm not thinking about concession speech or acceptance speech yet. Hopefully, we'll be only doing one of those two. And winning is easy. Losing is never easy. Not for me, it's not. I think we're going to have a great night, but it's politics and it's elections, and you never know.
You never know. Joining us now is the co-founder of the Lincoln Project and Republican strategist, our friend Rick Wilson. Also joining us, Eddie Glaude, chairman of Princeton's Department of African American Studies and an MSNBC contributor, and our dear friend and branding and marketing expert, Donnie Deutsch. I got to start with you, Donnie. What are you feeling? What do you know? What do you think of that Trump soundbite? He sounds almost contemplative.
I like a Trump soundbite from earlier today. The AP wrote, I'm going to read it. He said, this isn't about, it is about me, I guess, when you think about it, Donald J. Trump. And that's what election, we all know, if an election is about a referendum on an incumbent, he loses. And, you know, that is it. And I can look at this thing from 10,000 feet up, or I could look way down and go, this is about Obama voters that went to Trump, and now we're going back. There were 7 to 9 million of them. There's a big difference between where those voters are landing right now in the polls. And I do think, speaking of the referendum of Donald Trump, if you went back and he made one decision in January and said, I'm a wartime president, I'm going to be on top of this COVID, I'm going to protect you, we would be looking at a landslide for Donald Trump. Instead, I believe we're looking at a landslide for the Democrats tonight. I believe this is a referendum on who we are. I believe good versus evil. I believe right versus wrong. And a final congratulations to Rick Wilson on a fantastic job, that Lincoln Project, some of the best advertising I've seen in my career.
Rick Wilson, you are one of the people that turned this into the structural race that it is, a referendum on Donald Trump, with your unyielding, unrelenting ass-kicking of Donald Trump and his children and his campaign advisors, and everything about his presidency that felt so screwed up. What is the closing kick in the teeth from the Lincoln Project?
The closing kick in the teeth is that America is out there right now. They are in the streets. They have voted early. They have delivered their verdict. We're seeing that the turnout in a lot of Republican areas today is anemic. We're seeing that Democrats are coming out even on Election Day after having already kicked his ass on early voting. And, you know, the judgment of the people is here. Today it's happening. No ad that we could make can convince people more effectively than what they're seeing in their daily lives every minute of the day. And they're seeing he mishandled COVID. He blew up the economy. He is a narcissist lunatic. They're done. They've finished. They're out. They're going to stay in line. And folks, stay in line if you're in line. But the folks that stay in line right now, they're standing there waiting in the heat and the cold and everything else across this whole country. They are determined to push this man out of office, and it's coming. It's coming. We thought it might have been a 1980 election. It might be a 1964 election, where it is a cataclysm for the GOP.
Eddie, your voice has been one that has cut through, I think, sharper than just about anyone else on the sorrow that you feel and that Donald Trump has brought about. How are you feeling today?
My gut tells me that we're in for a historic night. I think we're going to see an extraordinary turnout across demographics. We're going to see the shift in the center of political gravity of our politics more generally. Because, Nicole, we face an election that is taking place in the context of a moral reckoning. Our democracy is on the ballot. It's not just Trump. Our democracy is on the ballot. And what we're seeing and what we've seen is that Americans are showing up. All of us are showing up. And we're going to take care of business tonight so that we can get about the hard work that November 4th will inaugurate. We're going to take care of business tonight because the hard work begins the day after, right? November 4th, November 5th. So I'm feeling good. I'm feeling excited right now.
Rick, Eddie, and Donnie, I got nothing but love, bottomless love for all three of you. I could not finish out this hour without letting the three of you be the exclamation point, or in Rick's case, however you put a bad word in punctuation. I love you all. Thank you so much for jumping on the air with us. I am going to duck out and turn over our network's coverage to my colleague Chris Hayes. I will be back with Rachel, Joy, Brian, Steve Kornacki, the whole gang at the big board starting at 6 o'clock. But stay right where you are. Chris Hayes continues our special coverage after a quick break. Steve Kornacki will have the first exit polls. Don't go anywhere tonight.
Good afternoon from New York. I'm Chris Hayes, and we are now officially 1 hour away from the first polls in the country closing in parts of Indiana as well as Kentucky on an election day in America where basically no news so far is good news. This is what I want to explain. Nobody wants lots of incidents and reports of wrongdoing, and so far things seem to be progressing smoothly. And that is, we should keep in mind, largely because more than 100 million Americans already cast their ballots before the day began. All of the in-person voting systems across this country that could have been faced today with an enormous crush amidst a pandemic raging out of control, they have had that load lifted for them. I've personally heard reports from people all over the country who are used to waiting in line to vote in person on Election Day saying today has been easy, and thank God for that. Just within the last hour, Joe Biden spoke about what he is hearing about the turnout so far.
What I'm hearing is that there's overwhelming turnout, and overwhelming turnout particularly of young people, of women, and there's an overwhelming turnout among African Americans, for example, in Georgia and Florida over the age of 65. So, I mean, the things that are happening bode well for the base that has been supporting it. But we'll see. We'll see.
Despite or because of the coronavirus pandemic, we shattered the record for early voting already. And while we do not know what the final turnout numbers will look like, it does seem reasonable to expect a historically high turnout election based off of everything we've seen up till today. We're going to begin with our correspondents who are fanned out across the country at polling places in key battleground states. NBC News correspondent Rahima Ellis is at a polling location in Philadelphia. NBC's Morgan Radford is in Charlotte, North Carolina. Rahima, to you first. How's it been?
It has been relatively quiet and easy, just as you mentioned in your introduction to all of this, Chris. This morning here at the Fillmore, which is a famous location in what's called Fishtown on the waterfront, is a very diverse community, a neighborhood here in Philadelphia. People lined up around 5:30 this morning, around the block almost, to get in here for 7 o'clock. They were concerned that they might see super long lines. Once they got in to the Fillmore, it's a place that holds about 2,500 people, they had no problem voting. Since then, we've seen a trickle of voters coming and going. No incidents reported whatsoever in this area. I should also tell you that one of the things at this location, they said this time last year, they had a 62% turnout of registered voters from this community. Before today, they had a 52% turnout of registered voters in early voting. As of today, 24%. So they are 74% of turnout of voters in this area in this election versus only 62% from 4 years ago. So for them, this is a very solid turnout. What have people been saying? Chris, they're talking about COVID-19 as something that's on their mind. They're talking about the appointment of federal judges. They want to see competence in their officials, particularly in the White House. And they're also concerned about criminal justice and police reform. And I should tell you, Chris, that police reform is literally on the ballot here in Philadelphia. There's a question that's saying to people, do they want to see a change in the police stop and frisk policy? Voters here in Philadelphia have an opportunity to make a decision on that. And it's coming after, just last week, there were riots following the police killing of a black man just last week here in Philadelphia. So these are issues that people are thinking about in this community, and they're voting on.
NBC's Rahima Ellis, thank you so much for that dispatch. I want to turn now to NBC News correspondent Morgan Radford, live in Charlotte, North Carolina, a hotly contested state. What have you seen today in Charlotte, Morgan?
That's right, Chris. I'm back in my home state of North Carolina, and at this hour, there are two big things we're keeping an eye on. Number one, this afternoon, we heard from the State Board of Elections, and they said there will now be a 45-minute delay in reporting results from precincts across the state. That's because there were just a few polling locations that are going to stay open a little bit later because they got a later start. So again, that does not mean that all the precincts tonight will be open 45 minutes later, but they must wait 45 minutes to report until that last polling station closes. The second thing we're watching is interesting, Chris, because we've been talking to state party officials from both parties, as well as the State Board of Elections, and they're really keeping an eye in these final hours on those unaffiliated voters. Both state Democrats and state Republicans say they have each respectively seen a surge in north of 100,000 new registered voters since the last election. But what they're both keeping an eye on is the 400,000 registered unaffiliated voters who registered since the last election. election. So typically when we talk to officials here, they said they tend to generally swing Republican in this particular state. But just recently, they've been seeing a lot of new families, young families moving into the area. And so some state Republicans are a little bit concerned that they're going to swing Democrat. We've been here at the polling station talking to people all day about the issues they care about. They've talked about the pandemic, response to COVID-19. They've talked about jobs, health care, the economy, the things that you would expect to hear from people in a battleground state in a hotly contested race, not only for the presidency, but also for the Senate. That's what we're hearing now is 2.5 hours before those polls close. But again, we will not hear anything about the reporting of those results until 8:15 tonight, Chris.
Morgan, thank you for that. Great reminder to everyone who's watching this today as those numbers come in, Ds, Rs, unaffiliated. Those margins behind those labels mean a lot. They can determine the course of the election. No one really knows what's up except in a few rare instances, maybe in Nevada, where they've got a pretty good track record. But keep that in mind. We don't know what those splits are of unaffiliated voters. We don't know the splits of Rs and Ds. Joining us now, Ron Klain, senior advisor of the Biden campaign, former chief of staff to Joe Biden and Al Gore, and former White House Ebola response coordinator, and MSNBC political analyst Zerlina Maxwell, host of Zerlina on Peacock, and senior director of progressive programming for Sirius XM. Ron, I saw an item today. You know, there's been lots of I think mostly jawboning and attempts at a psych job from the Trump camp about when he might declare a victory, etc. I saw this today, reported in Axios, that if news organizations declare Joe Biden the mathematical president-elect, he plans to address the nation as its new leader, even if President Trump continues to fight in court, advisors tell Axios. Tell us more about that.
Well, look, Chris, I mean, Joe Biden doesn't decide who won the election. Donald Trump doesn't decide who won the election. The American people decide who won the election. And if the results tonight or overnight or whenever they come in show that Joe Biden has won the election, then he will address the country as someone who's won the election. We're not going to get in front of it. We're not going to leapfrog it. We're going to let the voters decide the outcome. That's who is the judge in our system. It's not the candidates, it's the voters. And we're seeing record numbers of them, as you said before, record numbers of them come to the polls, voting early, voting in person. Their voices will be heard tonight, and I'm very hopeful that their voices will speak out for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.
Zerlina, you know, we've gotten used to, particularly I think over the last 8 or 9 months, watching lots of failures at many levels. And one thing that's striking to me as we watch this election day steam towards its conclusion, 100 million voters voting early, that there's actually been a lot of success in administering elections in this country. In some ways, it's the kind of happy story thus far. A lot of policy interventions, thousands of people working as poll workers and doing very hard work to make sure Americans can vote safely.
Absolutely, Chris, and I think that is really the credit to organizing on the ground, not just on the Biden campaign and on behalf of Democrats, but also just the organic grassroots organizing that began with the Women's March on January 21st, the day after Donald Trump was sworn in 2017, and continued through the 2018 midterms and special elections since. And so I think that what you're seeing is people have planned ahead of time for what to expect on Election Day. And I think it's really important to establish that the fact that 100 million people have already voted, it allows the Joe Biden campaign to specifically target those folks in their voter database and universe that are left. And that gives them an incredible advantage on the day of GOTV. And so if you are able to just curb the drop-off of 1 million voters in those 3 critical states that decided the election, that is sufficient, Chris. And so I think, you know, to your point and open about when Donald Trump thinks he wants to declare victory, that's not up to him. It's going to be whoever gets to 270, as you said recently on your show. But also, I think the smooth nature of today so far, knock on wood, is the credit to organizers who have put themselves out front as Americans and are participating and engaging in democracy. And I think that is a really great thing to see on a day like today.
All right, so I want you, Ron, and Zerlina, stick with me for a second, but we want to go over to the man of the evening, Steve Kornacki, who has, I believe, our first look of any exit polls of the evening. Tell us about where these polls come from, what they say.
Yeah, let's talk about this first before I show you some of the numbers. It's the first wave of the exit polls. We're going to get more numbers over the next few hours, so some numbers are going to move around here. Obviously, exit polling is a little bit different this year. There certainly were folks out at polling sites today collecting interviews with folks who went and voted early, but there was a lot more this year in terms of exit polling of contacting voters in all sorts of states who had voted early, who'd voted by mail, who'd voted in person early, finding out who they were, calling them, including them in the exit poll. So there was a big effort placed in that. I'm going to show you just a couple national numbers about some broad things you're seeing here in the exit poll. I think this was an interesting question here, asking voters to choose between the two major themes here you really heard a lot about. Controlling the coronavirus and rebuilding the economy, which was a more important issue to you? And you're seeing here 52 saying containing the coronavirus, 42% saying rebuilding the economy. Again, national first wave exit poll. Take that for what it is. Also, there was this, time of decision here. We talk so much about folks having their minds made up well in advance of this election. I remember in 2016, we were saying, wow, 85% had their minds made up well before the last month. Again, you're seeing the same number here, 85% saying, no, it wasn't the last month of this campaign. It was well before the last month of this campaign that they made up their minds. And then a couple of candidate qualities, we kind of threw at folks and said, which one matters the most to you? 4 different choices here. You could see 32% saying a strong leader. That was the most important thing to them. Having good judgment clocked in at number 2, caring about people like me at 21%, and then uniting the country at 19%. These are the 4 main qualities. You see what folks were weighing in on there. So some broad sort of qualities of candidate character there, and then those 2 major issues, Chris, you hear about a lot.
Can I ask a methodological question just to be clear on this? This is data that includes a sort of random statistical sampling of people that had already voted early and some people from this morning voting today?
Yeah, traditionally...
I just want to make sure that
traditionally, exit polls are, you just got folks, thousands of folks around the country at polling sites. That's still there, but in recognition of 100 million people voting early, now you've got, we say it's a poll in all these different states. It's a phone poll, but when you see these media polls in advance of the election where Biden's up 5 or Trump's up 2, those will have 800 people in them, 900 people. We're talking tens of thousands of people here. So it's a very different type of poll, the exit poll. And it's been done for years in states that have heavy early voting. We're just doing it in many more states now.
I want to go back, and I think we still have Ron Klain and Zerlina Maxwell here, and I wanted to follow up with Ron about that. Again, these are not, I just want to be clear to everyone, these are not gospel, these are not outcome determinative. It's an early snapshot of a part but not whole of the electorate. But I did think the coronavirus question posed there, Ron, was interesting. I think in some ways, I think those 2 things aren't actually oppositional to each other. I think that getting a strong economy depends on dealing with the virus. But I'm curious your reaction to how you think about that issue and how it's played out in this campaign.
Well, Chris, I think you're exactly right, which is obviously Joe Biden has, from the earliest days of this outbreak, been on top of it. He's launched a plan to deal with it. He's talked about all the ways Trump mishandled it. But I think the point is, whichever way those voters answered the question, Joe Biden is the better candidate for president. He has the plan to fight coronavirus. And unless we get the virus under control, we're not going to get our economy back to where it needs to be. Now, he has an economic plan to build back better. That's been part of it. I think when you look at these exit polls, what you're seeing is basically voters strongly believing Biden is able to handle coronavirus, also a strong vote of confidence for him on the economy. I think those 2 things put together, plus his ability to unite the country and our discussion about how we're going to bring people together to solve problems, I think all those things are leading to what I hope will be a very good night for us tonight.
Zerlina, that polling on when people made up their mind is fascinating to me, and it points to one of the strangest features of the last 9 months of our lives. The craziest, most tumultuous 9 months that many of us have ever lived through, in which the polling and the politics were shockingly stable in terms of what we've seen.
Yeah, that does surprise me, Chris, because I think that one of the things I've been thinking about all week is the fact that the pandemic has essentially equalized some of the impact of the damage and incompetence of the Trump administration. Early on, it was the Muslim ban or child separation, which impacted specific communities. But the pandemic was something that impacted everyone, not in the exact same way, but certainly changed everyone's daily lived existence. And I think that that is the most pressing concern. So it does surprise me a bit that folks had perhaps decided before they had to go into quarantine. But I do think, especially in the late phase of the campaign here, basically Donald Trump's rally schedule was a reinforcing message that he does not take the pandemic seriously, that he does not follow scientific guidelines, and he's defying them every single time he has a rally. So even though he thought those rallies were great for him, I think it just reinforced in voters' minds that he is not able to handle this crisis, which will need to be handled very swiftly in order to get the economy back on track and in order to get the country back on track.
It's a great reminder, of course, that just because it's Election Day, the virus has not gone anywhere. There are some numbers coming in that don't look great. In fact, it's going to be a very bad day, most likely. There are people right now watching who are nervous about loved ones who are hospitalized, and we will be monitoring all that as well. Ron Klain and Zerlina Maxwell, thank you both. Zerlina will be up late for election coverage on Peacock with our buddy Mehdi Hassan starting at midnight Eastern on The Choice. Definitely check that out. A lot more to get to this hour. Coming up, we'll look at how Democrats are pushing back against Republican efforts to disqualify ballots, plus Joe Biden's fight to expand the electoral map and pick off red states. We've also got James Carville, who will be with us. It is Election Day. Settle in and don't go anywhere. After the polls close tonight, we could see the opening of what might be the largest post-election legal battle in American history. That depends, of course, on what happens tonight. The Trump and Biden campaigns have already deployed hundreds of lawyers to key battleground states for what could be a state-by-state and county-by-county fight over which legitimate ballots should be counted. Yes, I said which legitimate ballots should be counted. And that could go well beyond what we saw in 2000 when all eyes were on Florida and, of course, its infamous hanging chads. The president has been particularly focused on Pennsylvania since the U.S. Supreme Court last month declined to overrule a Pennsylvania state Supreme Court ruling that the state must count mail-in ballots received up to 3 days after the election. Trump called the decision dangerous and claims with absolutely no reasoning or justification whatsoever it will lead to, quote, rampant and unchecked cheating. Joining us now, Alex Wagner, co-host of Showtime's The Circus, live in Doylestown in the heart of Bucks County, Pennsylvania. Also with us, NBC News election law analyst Ned Foley and Vanita Gupta, president and CEO of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, former head of the Civil Rights Division at the Justice Department. Alex, I think Pennsylvania has been probably the most watched state for a whole bunch of reasons. I think probably because the clearest path to a Biden victory is a Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania win. Pennsylvania polling the closest there. Also, there's already been a ton of litigation. How's it look from Bucks County, where you are?
Democrats are ready. I'll tell you, Chris, I spent some time with the Bucks County commissioner the other day, and he has tried to prepare for every eventuality. The thing I think they're most concerned about is the secrecy envelope that ballots need to be enclosed in. There can be no marks on that, and the envelope must be sealed. They're concerned that there is going to be some back and forth over stray marks on the outside of envelopes that are not entirely sealed. But I will tell you, I'm sitting right now in the headquarters of the Bucks County Democratic Party, where there is a small army of lawyers who will be going back and forth to the building through that window, which is where the County Board of Elections is meeting. And they are going to go toe-to-toe with any Republican lawyers who are trying to pull out some of these ballots for qualification. So both sides are very ready, and they have their eyes set on the prize, which is, of course, the ballots.
Yeah, I mean, there's, we should say, Vanita, there's sort of normal and abnormal jockeying, right? I mean, I've covered very close elections, and when it's very razor-thin margins, there are fights over ballots. There's fights over what can and can't be counted. That happened in a Queens DA race here in New York that came down to just a few votes. But the president's assertion that in some legal or democratic sense you have to know election night is completely ludicrous and nowhere in the Constitution or anywhere in our laws. And I want to play this clip of basically him expressing this idea that the lawyers will go in and deliver him victory on election night. Take a listen.
I think it's a terrible thing when people or states are allowed to tabulate ballots for a long period of time after the election is over. And I think it's a very dangerous decision because you're going to have 1 or 2 or 3 states, depending on how it ends up, where they're tabulating ballots, and the rest of the world is waiting to find out. Now, I don't know if that's going to be changed, because we're going to go in the night of. As soon as that election's over, we're going in with our lawyers.
We're going with our lawyers. I think Donald Trump has learned throughout his 4 years career that there's a lot you can do with lawyers, but I'm not quite sure that they're going to give him what he wants here. What do you think, Vanita?
Well, after Trump said that, everyone clamored to say every state in the union actually tabulates ballots after voting ends on November 3rd. So, the reality is that given COVID and what the strain that COVID has placed on elections and the fact that we're seeing a surge of people who are voting by mail, there's going to need to be some patience to figure out to give the states the time to actually do the counting. What's interesting is that today, just now, the Michigan Secretary of State just announced that it's likely that Michigan will be announcing its results tonight because so far they've had relatively smooth operation of elections. But we all know that we have to be patient, and the president can say whatever he wants, but the fact is that the voters are going to decide this election. There's no question that we are seeing unprecedented amounts of lawyers basically getting deployed to protect the count, largely as a result of what the president and Republicans have been trying to do to disqualify votes on technicalities and baseless charges. But in the end, I fully believe that it's the voters that are going to determine this election. And, my only ask right now is that for voters that are maybe standing in lines around the country, stay in line. You will be able to vote as long as you're in line. Voters are coming through this election despite all of the noise, all of the distractions.
Ned, there was a case in Texas yesterday that was really embodied, I think, a lot of what's been going on this election. We have seen, of course, an avalanche of lawsuits and litigations by the Trump campaign, the GOP, and sometimes just Republican-affiliated individuals to try to disqualify ballots, to try to make it harder to count them. In this case, an audacious lawsuit at the district court level, already rejected by the Texas Supreme Court, to just throw out 127,000 already cast ballots at drive-through voting locations in Harris County, that the federal judge at the district level threw that out. But the result was interesting. The Harris County clerk announcing that for Election Day, they would reduce to only one site of this drive-through voting because they were worried about the status of those ballots counted on Election Day, which goes to show how much the courts have loomed over election administration.
Well, that's true. I think the clerk there was cautious. I'd like to think that the legal system will protect voters, especially voters who rely on what they're told by election officials and by the courts about what's valid. So I'm hopeful that all the voters who do the right thing in terms of what they're told will get their ballots counted properly, whether it's Texas or Pennsylvania or North Carolina or anywhere.
Yeah, the other side of this, Alex, you and I are the same age and same generation. We remember Y2K, which was it's a fascinating story. 1999, people thought that the computers around the world would melt down because their dates only included 2 digits. There was a lot of hype about that. And there was actually a lot of work done to work on that so it wouldn't be a disaster. And then it wasn't a disaster. And I think you could make a little bit of a case so far about the election administration process. There was lots of warnings. And in response to warning, lots of changes and lots of energy, such that we're now in a place that so far is looking pretty good.
Absolutely. That is the sense that I've gotten across the country, Chris. There is widespread awareness over what could happen, and there are widespread preparations to make sure those eventualities don't come to pass. I mean, I will tell you, the Bucks County Commissioner knows the spotlight that is on him. He told me he wakes up in the middle of the night thinking about things that might go wrong, writes texts down, and then sends them in the waking hours to his workers to make sure that things go smoothly. I mean, sometimes I think we've grown up also, Chris, as long as we're dating ourselves, in an era of institutional decay. And this is one of those moments where it feels like the institutions might actually work. And that, in some way, is exhilarating.
I think it's a great point. Again, we are at 5:30 here on the East Coast on Election Day, so nothing is done until it's done. But as of this point, there has been a lot of hard work by a lot of people to make sure that people can vote and vote safely. Alex Wagner, Ned Foley, Vanita Gupta, thank you all. Ahead, Joe Biden's making a real push in red states like Georgia and Texas. DNC Chairman Tom Perez will talk about expanding the map ahead, plus the battle for control of the Senate. Senator Mazie Hirono of Hawaii joins us when our special Election Day coverage continues after this break.
Texas turning blue is literally a long time coming. This has been in the making for 2 years. Nobody believed it until 2018 occurred. The folks across the street, I love it. There's nothing like election.
A lot of enthusiasm in the state of Texas, a state which has seen record-breaking voter turnout, and just one of several. Democrats are hoping to turn blue this year as the latest polls show Trump and Biden neck and neck. A tight race in the Lone Star State is just one reason the Biden campaign is optimistic going into tonight. Campaign manager Jen O'Malley-Dillon told reporters earlier, "We feel like it's clear we're winning. All data really underscores how many pathways we believe we have and how few Trump has." Let's bring in MSNBC correspondent Garrett Hake. He is live in Houston, which has been at the center of one of the most phenomenal turnout stories in the entire country this year, Garrett.
Yeah, Chris, I mean, it's really been fascinating. About 1.5 million, almost 1.4 million and change Houstonians or people who live in Harris County came out and cast their ballots early. My Democratic sources tell me if they can get the number of total votes here in Harris County up around 1.7 to 1.8 million, they would feel really good about taking this state overall. They've banked about 150,000 votes so far today. That means they need to see a big rush here. They need to see about 150,000 more before close of business tonight to really make them think that they've got this unlocked. And if you look around the state, I've heard from Democrats, they feel good about what's happening in Dallas County. They're encouraged by the numbers in Tarrant County, which is super interesting. That's the Dallas-Fort Worth suburbs, a place that Beto O'Rourke flipped 2 years ago, and now is all of a sudden a place where Democrats think they can actually accumulate votes. Early in the day, they were concerned about turnout in places like the Rio Grande Valley and in El Paso. That has always been a problem for Democrats, to turn the Latino voters there into actual voters, to get turnout as high as they need it to be. But look, you follow Texas politics as closely as I do. If Joe Biden's going to win the state, he's going to do it on the backs of Harris County voters and getting those kind of massive turnout numbers. I have to tell you, I have to sort of set aside my expectations. I've been to this polling place a couple times. There's usually long lines. That's not the case today, but the numbers are what the numbers are, Chris, and I think we could be in for a very interesting night in this state.
Yeah, those benchmarks are exactly the benchmarks I've heard, and they point to the fact this is very close. In Tarrant County particularly, I mean, Harris County sort of moved towards Democrats before Tarrant did. Tarrant was the sort of last holdout where you had the very traditional Republican, suburban, affluent Southern voter that has now moved away from Republicans, and we saw that in 2018. It'd be very interesting to see what those splits are tonight. Garrett, thanks for that dispatch. Very, very interesting night ahead for the state of Texas. Another traditionally red state Democrats are eyeing tonight is Georgia. I want to turn to NBC News correspondent Blaine Alexander, who is live in Atlanta. What's it like there, Blaine?
Well, you know, I've got to say that it's quite remarkable here, Chris. We're in Fulton County, the most populous county in the state of Georgia. And really the thing that stood out to me today, and so many people watching Georgia, is what you heard Garrett say, the short lines, the remarkably short lines. You know, just walk with me a little bit. This is the polling precinct where we were back in June during the primary. And at the time we were reporting from here, the lines were stretched all the way down there, around the corner and around the corner again. People were waiting for hours. I spoke to a woman who was holding her baby and she was getting rained on, waiting for 4 hours. Well, today, literally like night and day. And officials, every official I've talked to, from precinct managers all the way up to the Secretary of State himself, are pointing directly to early voting. They say that because people turned out in such large numbers, in record-breaking numbers, almost 4 million people cast their ballots early. So that's why we're seeing places like this, other places around Fulton County and around the state of Georgia, seeing such short wait times, about 2 minutes on average, the Secretary of State says, for the state of Georgia. So all of that means that, especially with Georgia being so closely watched today as a possible state that could be flipped blue by Democrats, it also means, according to the Secretary of State, that we could have results in a rather timely manner. In fact, he's saying that the results could come in as early as tonight, with noon tomorrow at the very latest, Chris.
That is fascinating. As you note there, polls close at 7 p.m. in the state of Georgia. If you're watching this and you're seeing that, it's today is a good day. You can go vote. You can throw on a mask and go vote around this country right now, and you're almost certainly not going to be in enormous lines. I can't guarantee that, but we are seeing it in place after place thanks to that early vote. MSNBC's Garrett Hake and NBC's Blaine Alexander, thank you both. That was great. Joining us now, the chairman of the Democratic National Committee, Tom Perez, who is there in Wilmington, Delaware, in preparation for this evening. How you feeling, Tom?
Well, I feel optimistic. As Jen O'Malley Dillon and Ron Klain have said, we have multiple pathways to success, Chris, multiple pathways, and Donald Trump has a very narrow pathway. I spent the weekend, I spent Saturday, Sunday, and part of yesterday in Texas. If I told you a year ago, Chris, I was going to spend the last weekend before the most important election of our lifetime in Texas, that would have surprised you. But Texas is genuinely in play. And I was in all the cities along the Rio Grande Valley, whether it was McAllen, Laredo, Corpus Christi, Brownsville, and other cities. And where I would slightly disagree with Garrett is I understand that you got numbers in places like Harris County, Tarrant County, but you also, when you start adding up what's happening in these other counties, it is remarkable. And Latinos are turning out big time. I think when you look at the numbers, you're going to see remarkable Latino turnout. When you look at counties like Williamson County, which is suburban Austin, you know, in 2014, that was hardcore Republican. Now they're ready to flip everything top to bottom. And everyone I talked to, everyone in my 6-city swing here, they said to me, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are so helpful at the top of the ticket. There is a fusion coalition of hardcore Democrats, people coming out for the first time, and you're going to see that. Independents and you know, John McCain Republicans, although I would call them here in Texas, I think they're George W. Bush Republicans because they're compassionate conservatives. And there's nothing compassionate about anything that Donald Trump has done during his presidency. So it's not only watching the Democratic turnout. I think you ought to keep an eye on some of these independents and Republicans who are party of Lincoln Republicans, party of George W. Bush Republicans. And similarly in Georgia. The reason why you saw short lines in that piece there is because Atlanta and Fulton County and most of Atlanta have already blown through their 2016 numbers. And so, and that's the story in every county I was in Texas over the weekend. And that is why, but we want people to run through the tape. So if you're in line, make sure you stay in line. And whether it's in Texas, Georgia, or anywhere across the country, because we're leaving nothing to chance in all of these battlegrounds.
Tom Perez, there in Wilmington, Delaware, has been crisscrossing the country in anticipation of this day. Thank you so much for making a little time for us tonight.
Pleasure to be with you.
Also at stake tonight, control of the United States Senate. Of course, joining us now is Senator Mazie Hirono of Hawaii. And this Senate battle has gone back and forth. There were a bunch of races that popped up as possibilities that I think the polling has shown Republicans now favored in, whether that's Alaska or Kansas. But there is still a solid tier of races that are either toss-ups or leaning Democratic at this point. How important is Senate control to you?
It's all important because as long as Mitch McConnell is in control of the Senate, we're not going to be able to pass legislation that will help people, that will actually address the pandemic and get it under control. So it is critical. Mitch McConnell has sat on the HEROES Act that will help people during this pandemic for 5 months. So it's all important for any number of reasons.
I wonder what your thinking is. I mean, since you bring this up, you know, Election Day is today, but the Senate and the president will be the same tomorrow and the day after that. And for a month or two, we might hit 100,000 COVID cases today. Deaths are on the rise. Is there anything that can be done in the short term after today to get this pandemic under control and get people the relief they need?
I think what could happen is that if Mitch McConnell in the in-depth session decides to pass all kinds of legislation that will actually harm people, then when we take back the Senate, then that's why it's so important that everyone continue to vote and that every vote counts, because we can undo the things that he does in the last moments if that's what it's going to take to move us forward.
Your state of Hawaii, I noticed there were these really interesting stats about early turnout, and some of those states were the ones you'd heard a lot about. Texas, for instance, Georgia, and there are states that are hotly contested and maybe contested for the first time in several decades. Hawaii was at the top of that list. What's going on in Hawaii that people are running to the polls?
They know what's at stake, and so there's a lot of energy. And I think that the idea of being able to vote for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris is energizing everybody. So we've had more people voting in Hawaii than before statehood. So that's astounding. It's happening all across the country. That is why I have hope that sanity and decency can be brought back to our country through the election of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.
Just so folks know, we're showing some of those early exits we have. Those, again, are not definitive. They're the electorate as we have it now, but some interesting numbers down there as they go state by state. Senator Mazie Hirono, who's a senator from the state of Hawaii, which has smashed its turnout from 2016 before Election Day even started. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. Aloha, everyone.
Ahead, what to watch for tonight in what has been an election unlike any other in history. James Carville and Victoria DeFrancesco Soto will join us. Do not go anywhere. You know you're there for the long haul. Come back in a few minutes, and we'll keep going. All right, we're coming up on the 1 hour warning. It's getting very close. It's 7 p.m. Eastern. Polls are going to close in Georgia, Indiana, Kentucky, South Carolina, Virginia, and Vermont. And then, as they say, it is straight on till morning. We've also got a few polls closing at 6 p.m. in a few counties in Kentucky and Indiana, and that's when our live coverage starts, which is just 12 minutes from now. Joining us now, Democratic strategist James Carville and Victoria DeFrancesco Soto, MSNBC political analyst, assistant dean of the LBJ School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas. Victoria, let me start with you. You know, one of the places where there's been, I've seen a lot of interesting reporting and polling is around Latino voters, an incredibly heterogeneous group of folks that span the country from all different parts of the world with different political inclinations and tendencies. Some evidence that Joe Biden's margins had come down a little bit from Hillary Clinton's. What are you looking for tonight in terms of those voters, in terms of turnout and also the margins there?
Right, so both of those. Latinos have the dubious honor of having the lowest rate of turnout. But what we've been seeing in this early voting period and also what we saw in 2018 is Latinos are starting to buck that trend. They're saying, you know what, we are now awakening, excuse the cliche of the sleeping giant. So I think just looking at my home state of Texas, the early vote numbers are incredible, and I think they show a new trajectory. Now, when it comes to the choice, you know, there is a lot of question there because we have been seeing the Trump campaign putting a lot of work into courting Latino votes. Mm-hmm. They know they don't need an overwhelming amount of Latinos to support them, but they know they need about 30%. And that's the target, and they've been putting in the work. So the question is, these new Latinos who have been turning out, are they going to lean Democratic or Republican? If I were a betting woman, just looking at the youth turnout and the registration of young Latinos, I think that is going to help the Democrats in seeing that new voter enthusiasm.
James, you have had the thesis throughout that this is a pretty simple election in many ways, that there's an incumbent president running for re-election. The country is a mess. It's in bad shape, and it was in bad shape under the incumbent president in 1992, of course, when Bill Clinton last beat a one-term incumbent. Is that what it comes down to today in your mind?
Yes, he was never going to win. Look at my shirt. It's Mardi Gras tonight. All right? Get over it. I mean, all this bedwetting and then, you know, I think people are going to be surprised about is that younger Latinos are going to vote in greater proportion than anybody thought. And that's something I base on not just a wish and a whim, but I think they'll surprise on the upside. They're not a traditionally high voting, permitted to vote demographic, but I think we're going to be surprised how the news that I hear out of Florida is genuinely encouraging. I think we're just going to have a big night. I've thought that. I've said it all year long. I don't see a single thing that causes me to pause in that prediction.
Let me ask you a follow-up about those two states I was just talking about, Georgia and Texas. You know, Georgia, Texas, Ohio represent the three highest electoral vote totals that Donald Trump won in 2016. Those are all three states where their polling averages within a point or two. What does it mean for the Democratic Party and down-ballot Democrats in all those states, even if Donald Trump ends up carrying all of them narrowly? What's that mean for the state, for the composition of the state, for politics in that state, to have them be competitive in this way?
Well, Georgia and Texas, there's actually a reasonable chance that the legislature could flip in those two states. Lena Hidalgo, who is the county judge in Harris County, which is the county commissioner, in fact, weird way to think in Texas, but that's okay, it's Texas. It's probably one of the most significant off-year elections you've seen. So we're going to pay attention to these state legislative races. They're going to be, my friend Calvin Smythe might be the next Speaker of the Georgia House. He's from Columbus, Georgia. So I'm going to keep an eye on that. But I am not concerned at all that Biden is going to win. What I hope is the margin is sufficient and it's definitive that the country tells this guy exactly what they think of. But if you look over my shoulder, you'll see there's a little Pappy Van Winkle left. That's about $200 an ounce, and it's going down tonight. I don't care. It's going down.
It's going down one way or the other. Victoria, you know, this is the first election since 2000. This happens every 20 years that you have election in which two things are on the ballot. You've got obviously the president, you've got every House race, you've got state legislatures, but you've also got a redistricting coming up based on the decennial census, which means election night, again, those down ballot races all the way flowing through in every state of the union are going to have implications for 10 years from now.
So, Chris, in 2010, when we had the Tea Party revolution, close to 700 state legislative seats flipped. And that has changed the course of the decade, right? We see the politics that we see, I think, in large part because of that Tea Party revolution. Here in Texas, the Tea Party won so many seats that they had a supermajority that essentially Democrats were sidelined. They didn't even need to technically show up. So for me, I focus so much on the states, and I know it's not as sexy as federal politics, and presidential politics are incredibly important, but what happens in our state capitals, especially during redistricting years, is so crucial. So for me, that's something I am keeping my eye on, and as James said, Texas has a very real possibility of flipping. And I think if the House here in Texas flips, we're going to see a lot of changes in Texas across the board.
You know, James, there's been a lot of sort of characteristic bravado and trash talk from the Trump campaign, and they've been trying to psych everybody out. I'm curious whether you think he's kind of a paper tiger in that respect, that if the results are clear tonight, we're actually not going to see a lot of drawn out whining and complaining and litigating.
He is a loser. He lost the biggest midterm election in the last 100 years with the highest turnout. His approval is 43%. He's not a paper tiger. He's a nothing. He's nothing. He is going to get defeated soundly. It's going to be a good win. It's going to be good for the United States tonight. People have been tired of this guy since the night he was elected. The only people that fear him are these bedwetting Democrats. We're going to win. Get over it. It's going to be a good night. And Professor Victoria, you know, I'd ask you, but I do think that we're going to see I think we're going to see a nice increase in the young vote in this cycle. I think people are underestimating how activated the youth of this country is. I really do.
We've seen, Victoria, some indication of that in the early vote.
We have. So we have seen across the board, young folks come out and vote like never before. Again, Latino folks. What is here is that the campaign speaks to them. I think the coronavirus, the silver lining to it is that politics has become much more personal. And we know that young folks, black, white, brown, don't vote because politics tends to be more far removed. You don't have a mortgage to pay. You're not paying taxes. But with the coronavirus and so many deaths of loved ones, politics has become much more personal, and young people are seeing it.
Yeah, and it's a good reminder of the pandemic, which continues to burn out of control in the backdrop of this day in this very, very difficult year for so many. James Carville, Victoria DeFrancesco Soto, that was great. Thank you very much. All right, the first polls will be closing at the top of the hour. Our first characterizations of the night are coming in just over an hour from now. MSNBC's primetime election coverage. Brian Williams, Rachel Maddow, Nicole Wallace, and Joy Reid starts after a very short break. Stay with us.